Hello, I'm Teacher Jonathan, and this is a public lecture on the novel in English up to the year 1900, written by me, Jonathan Hewitt. The aim is to give a broad overview of authors and works, with a particular focus on the 19th century. The purpose is to produce a brief guide to this period of authorship, which may help people with understanding and with choices of books to read. As this is a public lecture, I will dispense with the conventions of academic referencing. A word on who I am. I am an English teacher. I read English literature at the University of Cambridge, where I wrote a dissertation on 20th century American fiction. As an undergraduate, I focused on Shakespeare and the Romantic poets, so to some extent this lecture is an extension of study that began at that time, going beyond the poetry of the Romantics to concentrate on the novels of that century. My first career was theatre, and I have a master's degree in theatre practice from the University of Exeter, where my dissertation was on the changing nature of the avant-garde theatre in New York over the last 40 years. As a teacher, I have a PGCEI and a master's degree in education, and my dissertation was on the implementation of the official guidance of Cambridge Assessment on the teaching of English for IGCSE and GCSE. Over the last 30 years, my interests have developed from drama and poetry towards the novel. This is partly a change in focus towards an interest in what an individual imagination can achieve, with something of an increasing scepticism of the ability of groups and organisations to as completely realise a detailed artistic vision as fully as can be achieved by an author's work, which requires only a writer and a blank page. Perhaps it is this starting point, the enabling of an individual voice, that has given the novel, and noticeably at its best, the characteristic of a voice which is unusual, marginal, or previously neglected. One might say that to some extent all remarkable writing seems to be somewhat at odds with its time. For example, Anne Bronte's two works, Agnes Grey and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, preserve her vision and voice for a later time when the work has been significantly more appreciated than at the time of original publication. The critical novel readily tests the limits of its originality of context in language and perception, as does Bronte, in terms of wife, home, family, a trait of public discourse we may trace back to ancient Greek theatre and its interrogation of the implications of terms such as oikos, or home. Arguably, an artist can more freely realise their artistic vision on the page, unimpeded by practical limitations and the imperfections and compromises that frequently accompany collective action. When engaged in the construction of a collective project whose nature is the complex interaction of practical talents, from designers to performers, there inevitably arises the limitations of what is realisable and repeatable on a daily basis for people working in an industry, as regular professional performance is. It is the property of the novel's unlimited canvas to preserve in authentic original utterance the creative voice, and many of whose voices from the 19th century that this lecture considers are, as we shall see, those of women authors. With historical novels aside, such as the works of Sir Walter Scott and in French Victor Hugo, and also the melodramatic social drama of Charles Dickens, aside from these notable exceptions, it is evident that a significant proportion of the novels of the 19th century are the novels of women writing about their experience. Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, the three Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Emily and Anne, Elizabeth Gaskell and George Eliot, whose real name was Mary Ann Evans, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Louisa Alcott, and so on. And in addition, in both the 19th century and the century prior to it, even when not the voices of women writers, the men are predominantly writing about women, as in Samuel Richardson's Clarissa in 1747, or Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary, 1856, published in English the following year. We may say, if there were a main theme to the novels of the 19th century, with some notable exceptions, it would be fair to say that it is the exploration, critique and documentation of the role of women in society, whether on the risks and repercussions of intentions to marry, as often in Jane Austen, or in Charlotte Bronte on the wrongs and redemptions of that society, or Agnes Grey on the reality of the Victorian institution of marriage.